This evening, we're going to be speaking on the covenants found within the Bible. It's important to know a covenant is in the ancient world, was like what we in the modern world would call a contract, a treaty, or a will. Each covenant establishes the basis of a relationship, the promises and conditions of that relationship, and the consequences if those conditions are unmet. Covenants provide the framework for how the whole biblical message holds together. As the message of the Bible unfolds, we see God as a covenant-making, covenant-keeping, and covenant-fulfilling God. God establishes covenants with certain people, and these covenants are a way God unfolds his redemptive plan. The covenants are the structure of the story. There are several covenants in the Bible, such as the Adamic, and land covenants. The 5 covenants are crucial for understanding God's redemptive plan through the Messiah, Jesus. We have the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant, Davidic covenant, and then the new covenant. So I'm starting us off with the Noahic covenant. 1,000 years into creation, in the time of Noah, God looked over his creation and saw that man was wicked. There was no one righteous except Noah. As you know, God brought the great flood to wipe out mankind, with the exception of Noah and his family, and to restart mankind. The word used here is the word wicked. The word wicked in Hebrew is ra. And ra has several definitions. The one used here and in most of the Bible is evil, but it also means misery, distress, and injury. Mankind was evil. The world was in misery and distress because they were broken. They had become corrupt, and the world was filled with violence. With this covenant, we see that God will no longer allow evil to reach completion as it did pre-flood. We find an example of this in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. The people speaking one language, they come together and start building this tower. And it leads their hearts towards pride and rebellion. They're relying on themselves instead of God. The Lord, of course, confuses their language, spreads them out across the world, and the tower is never completed. As the flood subsides, and Noah and his family and the animals have left the ark, we read in Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 through 17, the covenant God made with Noah. He is called to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. At this point, God puts fear among the animals towards man. At the same time, he allows animals to be food for man as long as the blood is drained from the body. God institutes capital punishment as well. God states, whoever sheds human blood, by humans, their blood shall be shed. We are showing here the importance that God has towards 1, the blood, and 2, the lives of his image bearers. And finally, as you all know, God states to Noah, his sons, and all living creatures that he will never once again destroy the earth with a worldwide flood. The sign he gives Noah and all of us today and all the earth is the rainbow in the clouds. We see Noah as an example of a better Adam. They are both called to multiply and fill the earth. They both have 3 sons. One of those sons falls to sin. But the major difference is Adam fails to follow God's direction, whereas Noah is obedient to God. Noah is also a foreshadow of the second Adam, Jesus. With the imminent flood coming, Noah brings salvation to all mankind through him, his sons, and their wives. And the flood washes away the sin of all the rest of the people.
All right, I want to speak to you about the Abrahamic covenant. And it starts in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. It says, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So in the time of the Old Testament, when they made a covenant, they would take animals and they would split them in half, and they would walk through the animals. Both parties would walk through the animals, and it was a sign. It was a blood covenant saying, if either one of us breaks this, it will cost us our life. So in Abraham's journey, God has made him all these promises, and he says, how can I know that this is true? And God says, go get the animals. And Abraham gets the animals, and he splits them in half. And then he has this strange dream. He goes to sleep, and there's a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch that goes through the animals. But Abraham knew that God just made a covenant with me that would cost him his life if he broke it, saying, I will keep my word to you. So there's several provisions of this covenant. One was he said, I will make you into a great nation. Abraham was going to become the nation of Israel, and that would include land. God tells him he's going to give him all of Israel, Canaan, right? And they're going to go into exile for 400 years before all of that comes to pass, but God defines where the land is, and he was going to make Israel into a great nation. And he says, I'll make your name great. You'll be a blessing. Those who bless you, you bless, and curse those who curse you. So he puts this blessing upon Abraham, all of Israel. Whoever blesses them will be blessed, and whoever curses them will be cursed. Then he says, all the people of the earth will be blessed through you. So he made Abraham very blessed to bless others, but also through him would come the great blessing. Also, we see there was a name change. God comes, Abraham was Abram before, right? And God comes to him as part of the covenant and says, I'm changing your name from Abram to Abraham. Abram meant exalted father, but he becomes the father of the nations through the covenant. And Sarai becomes Sarah, and Sarai meant princess, basically princess of her tribe. And Sarah means like princess of a greater measure, like a princess of all the nations. And then through all of this, God says to him, I want you to take the sign of circumcision. And so he commands Abraham and all of his family, all the people, all of his servants, and he tells them, I want you to be circumcised. And then one day they all go, they obey God, they're all circumcised. And this was a sign of Israel being set apart to God, and people would know that they were different by this sign of circumcision, and they were his set apart people, set apart for him.
The Davidic Covenant, we're going to read out of 2 Samuel 7:8. It'll be on the screen, but just think as we read how incredible this is. This is God's promise to King David. Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth, and I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them, so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up from your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Pretty powerful. We see that David held on to this in his dying words in 2 Samuel 23:5. David said, "If my house were not right with God, surely he would not have made with me an everlasting covenant, arranged and secured in every part. Surely he would not bring to fruition my salvation and grant me my every desire." So on David's deathbed, he holds fast to the promise of God that God has secured this covenant. David said, if my house were not right, God would not do this. And David knew the status of his house, of sometimes his heart, of his kids, of his sins and failures that were not always perfect. And still, despite that, David was still a man after God's own heart, and God is the one to fulfill this covenant. And you can think, too, that this covenant was a beacon of hope for Israel. Just think about all the kings they went through and how they held on to this covenant promise, despite the fact that there were so many evil kings that did wicked. And evil kings that would come, and you can imagine they just thought, all right, there's a king coming who will be holy and whose kingdom will endure forever. Right now we have to endure this wicked king. We see this covenant again in Isaiah 55:3. The prophet Isaiah says, "Give ear and come to me, listen that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, like my faithful love promised to David." You see, God had faithful love for David, and David received his promise by faith, just like the heroes of Hebrews 11 tells us. They received their promises by faith. David did not see the fulfillment of this, but he held on to it with faith. Now, through the Davidic covenant, we see four themes that relate to Jesus. We see a royal dynasty. You see, God promises to establish a line of descendants from David, ensuring his throne will continue through successive generations. And Jesus is a direct descendant of David through both his earthly parents, Mary and Joseph, fulfilling the requirements of a Davidic lineage. We see an eternal kingdom. The covenant guarantees that David's kingdom will endure forever, signifying not only temporal sovereignty, but an everlasting spiritual kingdom under God's reign. Jesus inaugurates a spiritual kingdom that transcends earthly boundaries and temporal constraints. His kingdom is not of this world, Jesus said, John 18:36, but it is established in the heart of believers, offering eternal salvation and reconciliation with God. The third theme we see is a temple. David promised to build God a temple, which took place through his son Solomon, emphasizing stability, prosperity, and divine presence within the nation of Israel. And Jesus himself declared himself to be the true temple, John 2:19, signifying his role as the ultimate dwelling place of God among humanity. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus provides access to God's presence for all who believe in him. And finally, the fourth theme in the Davidic covenant is the father-son relationship. God promises to be a father to David's descendants and assures his steadfast love and also discipline. Jesus embodies the perfect relationship with God the Father and God the Son, serving as an example of obedience, humility, and love. And even though in the Davidic Covenant it talks about floggings inflicted with human hands when the descendant sin, we see God's judgment upon David's sons who sinned, but Jesus did not sin, and yet he still received the flogging inflicted with human hands as he marched towards Calvary and bore the weight of sin. Through Jesus, believers are adopted into God's family and receive the fullness of his love and grace.
So tonight you've heard of the 4 covenants that we see in the Old Testament that point towards the redemption of the Messiah. We started with the Noahic covenant, which is still in effect to this day. That's why thousands of years have gone by and there's never been a flood or a disaster that has struck the entire world. And then you have the Abrahamic covenant, that all the people of the world will be blessed through Abraham. Still happening to this day. And then you get to the Mosaic covenant, and Joe mentioned, he said that this one's a little different. This one required something on behalf of us. And it's the one of the 4 you heard tonight that's actually not still in effect. I talk about that in a second. And then we get to the Davidic covenant, the covenant that not only would the Messiah come through the line of David, but that the Messiah, like David, would reign as a king. While Jesus came and defeated sin and death and sits at the right hand of the Father, there is still an unfulfilled promise in that covenant. There is a time when he will return, and on earth as it is in heaven, he will reign as king. And so that covenant is still in effect between God and man. In Zechariah 6, God shows Zechariah that he's to take the silver and the gold, and he's to make a crown, and then he's to place it on the high priest's head, Joshua. Not Zerubbabel, not the governor. And there had to be fear within Zechariah, like, oh man, what are the people going to think? Are they thinking that I'm trying to overthrow Zerubbabel? You see, never before in Israel's history had the priest or the king held both offices. And so you had Joshua, who is the prophet and the priest, and now they symbolically, and it says this, placed the crown upon his head to show that the Messiah will hold the office of king, priest, and prophet. And we wait for that day when the Lord returned. But you and I, we live under the 5th covenant today. The new covenant. The expression new covenant appears 7 times in the New Testament portion of your Bible. All of these go back to a term coined by the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 31, 33, 31 through 34, where God promises to Israel that he will initiate a new covenant. God characterizes the new covenant as not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand and brought them out of Egypt. In other words, not like the Mosaic covenant, the law. When will this covenant begin and take effect? Well, Jesus, as he sat with his disciples in that upper room at the Last Supper, at what would be Jesus' final Passover meal, declared that it was going to begin with his sacrificial death. After they had eaten, in Luke 22:20, Jesus said, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." And Matthew clarifies that his death is indeed needed for the atonement of sin. Matthew 26:28, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The book of Hebrews was written to Jewish believers in Jesus. And the idea of a new covenant is specifically emphasized in the book of Hebrews. And then it says specifically that it will be a better covenant than what was given to Moses. In fact, Hebrews chapter 8, verses 8 through 12, quotes Jeremiah 31 through 34, which says this: "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their mind. I will write it on their heart. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more." That last line is so important, because to us, that's just par for the course. That's what it means to come to Jesus, is that your sins are forgotten. As far as the east is from the west, right? But before that, in the law, there was just atonement. The death of the animal was just there to atone, but the sin was not forgotten. There couldn't be, but there was a time coming promised by God through his prophet Jeremiah, when I will remember your sin no more. What must that look like? What did they think that would be? They knew that God didn't forget their sin. They knew that when they brought their sacrifices to the temple, that all they were doing was atoning for. But there's actually going to come a time when the laws, right? The scrolls after scroll after scroll, 613 laws, and then 1,000 more plus that man would make up on top of the protect, to wall in the law. There would come a time when it would actually be written on the hearts and the mind. What are we going to do with all of our scrolls? God's law is going to be written on the heart and the mind? How? Hebrews 8:13, where the writer of Hebrews quotes Jeremiah and then says this: "By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear." Hebrews 8:13. Which covenant is obsolete? The Mosaic covenant. You see, Israel violated the Mosaic covenant. God made a covenant, and the way a covenant works is it remains in effect until one party violates it or it comes to its time of completion. As I said earlier, the other three covenants remain open because they are not at their time of completion. They were not contingent on man. David's kingdom was not contingent on David's action or his sons. It was promised that it was going to come no matter what. But the law was contingent. If you remain obedient, you will enjoy the blessings of the covenant. If you don't, then the curses come upon you. But when man broke that covenant, it still needed to be fulfilled. The promise was, may I be as these animals, may I be dead, may I be split in two. And what the law showed for thousands of years was that we cannot pay that. Over and over, judge after judge, prophet after prophet, king after king, we're not capable of paying the price. And so Jesus comes as a better covenant. Though it is different than the Mosaic covenant, I want to be clear, it's not a destruction of the covenant. It is fulfillment. What do I mean by that? Remember, Hebrews, I just read that the first has been made obsolete and it will soon disappear. Matthew 5:17 says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." So what does fulfillment mean? Warren Wiersbe gives the example of an acorn. You can take an acorn and you can smash it with a hammer into a fine dust and then throw it in the trash. And that would be abolishing the acorn. Or you can take the acorn bury it in the ground, and it will fulfill its role into a mighty oak tree. Now the acorn's purpose has been fulfilled. We have to look at the purpose of the law of Moses. And through the Mosaic Covenant and those 613 commandments, Jesus proceeds to say in Matthew 5, after he says, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill them, that not one single jot or tittle, dot over an I or crossing the T will pass away until all these things have come and been fulfilled. Jesus would then perfectly fulfill each of the requirements of the law given to Moses. He would be born under the law. He would lead a sinless life. He would teach the truth of the law. And Galatians 3:13, he would bore the curse of the law. That was that fulfillment that Jesus speaks of as he's hanging on the cross. And he cries out to the Father and says, why have you forsaken? He hangs his head and he says, it is finished. The fulfillment. The law has been paid in full. There is a new and better covenant for mankind. Upon Jesus' death and resurrection, the covenant of Moses has now been fulfilled. Jesus would spend the rest of Matthew 5 deepening the revelation of the requirements of the new covenant. He would teach us now that it's not just murder to physically kill someone, but to hate them in your heart. He would deepen the revelation on adultery, on cursing, on divorce. And he would show that the actions were never what really mattered. It was always where it started, in the heart. Don't you know that Adam didn't sin when he took the hold of the apple and bit it, but he sinned when he first wanted to be like God rather than worship in his heart. And so Jesus would then give perhaps the most comprehensive, irrefutable explanation of his new covenant, Matthew 22:36-40. Teacher, he would be asked by the Pharisees, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus would reply, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. It's so wild. Mankind started with one law: don't eat from the tree. And we progressively got more and more and more. When the new covenant comes, when the final covenant that would be established between God and man comes, he restores us. And he said all of the law, all of the rituals, all of the specific weights and measurements, everything is summed up in this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, first and foremost. Put nothing above him. And secondly, love your neighbor as yourself. Because if I love my neighbor, then I won't murder my neighbor. I won't hate my neighbor. I won't covet my neighbor's possessions. I won't commit adultery. I won't lie. I won't steal. The second thing that happened when Jesus said it is finished and fulfilled the law was a promise that was seen throughout all of the Old Covenant. Ephesians 2:11-18, and I have this on the screen, says, therefore remember that formerly you who were Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is something done by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship with Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. Now, Christ Jesus, you who once were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and its regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. Oh, come on. Yes, Lord. He came and he preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. Oh, this is what we celebrate tonight. Do you see the fulfillment? Do you see the covenants? Do you see how God worked through all of the Old Testament from the beginning of creation to show us, I have a plan. And when we couldn't conceive what that plan would look like, he did the unthinkable. He left his throne. He left his home to enter into creation, into his... In 1961, a Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, defiantly declared when his cosmonaut returned from outer space that while he was up there, he did not find God. Think about the arrogance of this. Mankind finally leaves Earth and we go out of our atmosphere and we're in space and we're like, God, where are you, God? And so there's this famous quote, my astronaut was up in space, we couldn't find God. New York Magazine asked C.S. Lewis to respond. His rebuttal on the absurdity of trying to find God in space was so brilliant. It was published in an essay in 1963 that would be entitled The Seeing Eye. Listen to what Lewis said. Looking for God or heaven by exploring space is like reading or seeing all of Shakespeare's plays in hope that you will find Shakespeare as one of the characters. Shakespeare is in one sense present at every moment in the play, but he is never present in the same way as Lady Macbeth. Nor is he diffused through the play like a gas. And then he pulls no punches. If there were an idiot who thought that plays exist on their own without an author, our belief in Shakespeare would not much be affected by his saying, quite truly, that he had studied all the plays and never found Shakespeare in them. You see, to some, God is discoverable everywhere, and to others, nowhere. Those who do not find him on earth are unlikely to find him in space. After all, we're hanging in space, he says. Every year we go on a huge circular tour in space. But if you send up a saint in a spaceship, he'll find God in space as he found him on earth, because it depends on the seeing eye. Yes, C.S. Lewis, Timothy Keller, and preaching on this decades ago, tells a story of a mystery author named Dorothy Sayre. She wrote mystery novels in a series with Lord Peter Wimsey. As the series went on, readers noticed that she wrote in a character who mimicked Dorothy's accomplishments in life. And as it became known, and she was interviewed on it, she said, I looked at Lord Wimsey and I felt so bad for him. I saw how sad he was and how much pain he was in. And so she wrote herself into the story because she actually fell in love with the character that she wrote. This is what the covenants were leading toward. Tonight, what we call Good Friday, on the night that Jesus was crucified, was the culmination of God's story of redemption. And now he wasn't just going to fix it if we were better or if we obeyed more laws, but that he would write himself into the story. He loved us so much that he wrote himself into the story, that he took the punishment upon himself. He loved you so much, wherever you're at tonight. Let nothing this world throws at you try to tell you you are not worthy of the love of your Father. As we prepare to leave this evening, we're going to close with a song. I'm going to get up and pray, and as we exit the room, I just ask that we would exit in silence until you get out to the lobby, as we allow the weight of this to just sit on us for a little bit. It's okay if it sits on you tonight and into tomorrow, because Sunday will come and we will gather together and we will celebrate. But until then, we mourn with those who mourned when they saw our Redeemer upon the cross.